Welcome back to Face the Nation. I'm Margaret Brennan. We're joined now by Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey. He sits on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and is the top Democrat on the panel that focuses on North Korea policy. Senator, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Because of the kind of oversight role you have, you keep a close eye on the State Department and the Secretary of State, who is with the president and presumably in the room. What kind of promises have been made by this administration in terms of what they will share with Congress?
We have not been included in any of the preparation for this negotiation. The Democrats have been kept in the dark in terms of what his approach is going to be. I think it would have been far better for him to have included us, since it is a Democrat and Republican objective to have a negotiation, a direct negotiation between Kim and Trump. But thus far, the president has not included Democrats.
What would it take to win your vote to lift sanctions, so to speak? I mean, if they get any kind of agreement and it goes to the Congress, what would change your mind?
Well, the president, first of all, is going to have to extract from Kim a definition of what denuclearization means. Right now, there's a vast gulf between what the United States and North Korea believe that word means. And on our side, we believe it means a removal of all nuclear weapons and delivery capacity on the Korean Peninsula. Kim does not actually agree with that. We would also want an inventory of all of their nuclear weapon sites, all of their ballistic missile sites, all of their development, manufacturing, research facilities to be made public, and for there to be a verifiable way of ensuring that there is a dismantlement of those facilities, which is taking place, again, on a verifiable basis.
Would you want any agreement to come up for a vote in the Congress as a treaty, something President Obama was criticized for not doing with the Iran nuclear deal?
I would want to see that come forward as a treaty, because part of this negotiation will also be an ending of the Korean War, which is something that goes all the way back to 1953. So I think it would be wise for the president to come to Congress to ensure that there is a ratification of any agreement which does take place between the North Koreans and the United States, while not excluding, I just want to make this clear, the South Koreans and Japan. We cannot sell out our allies as part of this negotiation.
Would you have an expectation that the president should seek consent, an authorization for military force if these talks fail and he looks at those other military options? We've heard from Senator Lindsey Graham today, a Republican, that he has an AUMF drafted.
There is no military solution to the problem that exists on the Korean Peninsula. North Korea has nuclear weapons. The United States has nuclear weapons. This isn't like the United States and Iran. Iran did not have nuclear weapons. Neither did Iraq. This would become very catastrophic very quickly. We have 28,000 troops right on the demilitarized line. We have 250,000 other Americans within a 10-mile radius of that border. The casualties would mount up so quickly that it would exceed the first Korean War in terms of deaths to Americans within the first few days, and then it would just escalate from there. So
you would vote no if the president asked for your consent?
What the president should do, rather than looking for an authorization for the use of military force, the president should come back to Congress and ask for even greater authority to put more economic sanctions on the North Koreans, to really squeeze their economy. The president is saying that he has already used maximum pressure on the North Koreans. That is not so. There has been no cutoff of all of the crude oil that flows from China into North Korea. If we wanted to, we could put together an international coalition that demanded China to cut off that oil into North Korea to further intensify the pressure to come to the table to negotiate. A war is not, in fact, something that can be fought, which is why I've introduced a bill that prohibits the president from a first use of nuclear weapons against North Korea if we have not been attacked by nuclear weapons from North Korea. That would be absolutely catastrophic. We need that debate in our country, a debate as to what the authority is of this president or any president to use nuclear weapons first.
I want to quickly ask you about this tariff and trade war that we're now talking about. Senator Corker says he wants to put into place some kind of restriction to keep the president from being able to ratchet up tariffs. Would you support such a measure?
Yeah, under Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution, that's a prerogative of the Congress. Right now, the president is actually driving our allies away from us as we need them even more, while welcoming in the Russians. So I think the conversation which Senator Corker has raised is something that on a bipartisan basis is welcome. I think it's time for the United States Congress to begin once again to reassert its authority under Article 1 to play a key role in the imposition of any
That
tariffs.
sounds like a yes vote from you, Senator.
Absolutely.
We'll be right back with our political panel, so stay with us on Face the Nation. It's time now for some political analysis. Molly Ball joins us. She is a national political correspondent at Time Magazine, getting tongue-tied this morning. Selena Zito is with us. She's from the Washington Examiner, also a columnist at the New York Post. Evan Osnos writes for The New Yorker. He has reported extensively on North Korea and has a piece out this week on the historical context of the current diplomatic effort. And Sungmin Kim covers the White House from Capitol Hill for the Washington Post. Welcome to all of you. Evan, you have spent some time in North Korea reporting on what you've seen on the ground. This is diplomacy on steroids, on a fast track. Do you have any sense of what is happening inside North Korea when it comes to their own expectations?
Well, I think that, the big question for all of us is how did we go from talking about nuclear war a few months ago to sitting at the negotiating table today? And the answer is that actually, beneath the pyrotechnics, there has been this big dynamic going on, which is that North Korea has been trying, not only over the last several months, but over the last few years, to try to figure out a way how to engage the outside world. They're sort of trying to do what China did in the late 1970s. And we have to, they don't want to be compared to China. But remember, China was a communist country, it still is, that said we have to open up economic control, maintain political control. And part of sitting down with Donald Trump is to say, how do we hold on to our dictatorship in Pyongyang while also beginning to engage the outside world economically?
Little by little, without threatening their control, I think is key there. Sung, when you look at these talks, I mean, you heard Senator Markey on this program just say a few moments ago, he doesn't feel like Congress is clued in, being briefed, and that key information is being shared. Are you hearing similar gripes?
I think the way that the diplomacy is being engaged is kind of leaving almost everybody in the dark right now. But I think what's going to be critical to see in the summit and in subsequent meetings going on to see whether if the president does submit something to Congress for approval. And as we've talked about before, that was a major concern from Republicans during the Obama administration that he didn't get official congressional sign-off for the Iran deal. So I think it'll be interesting to see. Senators have said that the administration has already made those commitments to submit any sort of agreement to Capitol Hill, but obviously that would only begin a massive fight in Congress over whether to approve that nuclear deal.
It was interesting to hear that Senator Lindsey Graham has an authorization to use military force ready to go, suggesting he thinks the president would have to ask permission, essentially, before taking military strikes.
And it was also interesting with Senator Markey just earlier, refusing to even entertain the prospect of an AUMF because he says there's no military option on the Korean Peninsula. A lot of members of Congress feel that way as well. And that's why both Democrats and Republicans have been so eager to see these diplomatic efforts succeed.
Selena, you have your ear often to the ground when it comes to how the Trump supporters and Trump base receive some of this information. This is a high-risk gamble for the president. What is the perception here? Like, does he walk away with a win just by walking into that room with Kim Jong Un?
Pretty much. I mean, that's what he does best, is high-risk gambles, and he does things that are a little bit unorthodox and not as traditional as you would see other presidents. I have found, not just with people that supported Trump, but people that either stayed at home or supported Clinton have been able to step back on this issue and understand that we're in the middle of something very historic. It's sort of, if you're older, it's sort of like Nixon in China. Or if you're a little less older, it's sort of like Reagan in Geneva with Gorbachev. So I think people understand there's a moment here that we might all be able to benefit from. And so I think they're enjoying, or they're at least sitting back and watching this with maybe hope and skepticism.
Molly, you, on a different topic, have a cover story in Time. You write that about the Mueller investigation, something that the president doesn't really want as much press about, but is certainly angered by and tweeting about himself. This is a major diversion from that, of course, right now. But you did see a development in the case with more indictments against the former Trump campaign chair, Paul Manafort, this week. How significant?
Well, Mueller is playing hardball, as he sort of has been all along. But there has been a notion that he is ratcheting up the pressure on Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, who was out on bail pending a trial, who has, unlike several former Trump associates who have pleaded guilty so far, Manafort has continued to fight the charges very hard, and he's now accused of tampering with potential witnesses, and Mueller is seeking to throw him in jail pending his trial, and also bringing charges based on that alleged witness tampering. So we see, increasing pressure on Manafort, potentially trying to get Manafort to cooperate, to turn on President Trump and offer evidence having to do with the substance of the investigation. Remember, the charges against Manafort have to do with things that he did long before he ever joined the Trump campaign. It's money laundering and other charges from his career as a lobbyist. So that's not what the Mueller investigation is supposed to be about. His mandate is to investigate Russian meddling, and this is one of the criticisms from the president and other critics of the investigation, is he has wandered quite far afield of that supposed mandate. So the idea is that Mueller may be putting pressure on Manafort and others in order to try to get at the potential collusion that he is investigating in 2016.
Selena, while this may be far afield of the mandate, these are significant, and this is actual legal momentum here. Right. These are individuals being charged, companies being charged as well here. So can the president still get away with calling it a witch hunt?
He probably will, whether it's true or not. That's the mantra that he has adopted, and I don't think he's going to stray from it. And to Molly's point, the president is unhappy with how far out this scope has come. And he believes that to him, this is proof that this is not about him, and that the charges against him are unfair. And this is proof in the pudding. And I think that's where the president's head is right now on this issue.
So, are we going to see anything from Congress on the immigration front before these congressional races in November, or is this just an internal fight with no progress?
Count me as a skeptic of any sort of immigration action on Capitol Hill. I think the big day to watch is Tuesday, because that's been kind of the imposed deadline for this discharge petition, which is a complicated procedural maneuver to trigger these immigration votes in the House. Tuesday is a tentative deadline that these House moderates have set on whether these quiet negotiations with conservatives would actually succeed, or if they're just going to go ahead and force votes over the desires of their leadership. But Republicans have constantly struggled on immigration issues for years and years. And there is a reason why when immigration legislation that involves any sort of pathway for citizenship, whether it's for Dreamers or for a broader population, it's passed under Democratic control. It was a Democratic-led Senate in 2013 and a lame duck Democratic House in 2010 that passed the DREAM Act. So if there is a way to coalesce both the moderates who want these legal solution for the Dreamers, and the conservatives who do also want a legal solution as well, but they've talked about the need for more security measures. If there's a way to coalesce 218 Republican votes on that, we'll see by Tuesday, but again, count me as a skeptic.
Evan, you heard Larry Kudlow on this program, the economic advisor to the president, saying that the blow up with the Canadian prime minister really had more to do with the North Korean leader and making him look weak, making the president look weak ahead of those talks.
Yeah.
You don't normally hear those two countries in the same sentence, but is there something to what the White House is arguing here, that so much of the U.S. weight has to do with perception?
Well, look, the president decided that this was a grave insult that he couldn't abide from Canada. The reality is our allies and our adversaries, things are being thrown upside down right now. The president walked into what should have been the friendliest club he will ever be in, and he managed to leave that in tatters. And that is a problem that doesn't just pose a challenge for the president tomorrow. This is a long-range issue that he has to confront. How do we keep Americans safe over the long term? The way you do that traditionally is by keeping your allies close and working through problems in ways that make sense. This is not how we've done it in the past, and I don't think it puts us in a particularly strong moment as we go into Singapore.
Syngman, do you think that, I mean, it's been interesting to see some Republicans speak out on the trade front with this dispute at the G7, but they're sort of few and far between. There hasn't been outcry.
And I think we saw a moment earlier this week when we did see Republicans starting to coalesce around legislation that would limit the president's power on tariffs. We had that legislation from Senator Bob Corker, who isn't always a Trump ally, but you do have senators such as Pat Toomey, Mike Lee, Jeff Flake behind that legislation as well, with a bunch of Democrats. But the president gathered about a dozen Senate Republicans at the White House on Wednesday, mostly friendly Senate Republicans, and he made the message clear that I don't like this bill. I think it infringes on my power to negotiate on trade issues. And Republican leadership tell us that this bill, you can get a vote if you want, but if it doesn't have a presidential signature, it's all just kind of an exercise.
Interesting to see how this develops. Thanks to all of you. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back, and we turn now to Ken Starr, who you probably remember very well from the Bill Clinton era. He has served as a circuit court judge and the U.S. Solicitor General, and many Americans came to know him during that investigation into Whitewater and other controversies, including Monica Lewinsky during Bill Clinton's presidency. And I think in many ways, thank you for coming on today. You are so uniquely positioned to give us some perspective on what is playing out now in terms of the special counsel's probe of President Trump, his campaign, and these Russian interference allegations. When you see the developments like we saw this week with the campaign chairman being indicted on another charge here of obstruction of justice, I mean, how should Americans understand what they are seeing? Is this the political witch hunt the president alleges? Is this a serious case?
It's definitely a serious case. We know that from the indictments and guilty pleas that have already been obtained. So what we're seeing is the special counsel, Bob Mueller, whom I know and whom I greatly respect, just following the evidence as he sees it. Now, these are charges, presumption of innocence in the United States, and that's a very precious right that we have. These charges are going to have to be proven. But what this shows is that Bob Mueller is very seriously looking at a variety of issues and questions.
Well, we also know that Bob Mueller's team is talking with the president's own attorneys about getting the chance to interview him. You faced some of these questions when you were dealing with then President Clinton. I think you went to him something like 6 times. You ended up having to subpoena before ultimately he agreed to sit down. If you were consulting with President Trump's lawyers, would you advise him to sit with counsel and sit with Bob Mueller?
I think they better be cautious, and I think they are being cautious. First, we have to remember this is the President of the United States, and this is an authorized law enforcement investigation. So that makes the situation unique. Looking at it simply from the perspective of a defense lawyer, you never want your client, unless you have an extraordinarily high level of confidence, to be exposed in this way. So there are only 2 perspectives here. The president, you're talking to the president of the United States, but he also is at least the subject of a serious investigation. So I think caution is the rule of thumb here.
But an obligation, is there an obligation on his part to sit and answer these questions?
I think there may be a moral obligation, frankly, because he is the President of the United States. And unless he takes very decisive action, such as directing the firing of the special counsel and the like, and there's been no suggestion to my knowledge that that's in the offing at all.
But you believe he could?
Oh, yes, the President clearly has the authority to direct the firing, if not a direct firing himself.
What would that signify to you?
It would be, I think, but it's a political question. I don't think it's obstruction of justice, and I disagree with those who seem to find obstruction of justice in almost anything that the president has done. But it certainly would be, I think, a political firefight of the highest order, because you have people in both parties saying, this is an authorized investigation, let it run its course.
You've been supportive of the president's decision to hire Rudy Giuliani, who I know you have known for some time. But in terms of the work he's doing to defend the president, what do you make of his strategy? Well,
I'm not sure. I just have great confidence in Rudy, but Rudy has access to facts that I don't have. Would I have said exactly the same way in the same way that Rudy has done it? Perhaps not, but don't underestimate Rudy Giuliani. He is an extraordinary lawyer.
You, when you were dealing with President Clinton and that very long investigation of him, he faced charges of obstruction, perjury. There were questions of that. And his strategy seemed to be to try to convince the country that this was a political witch hunt.
Right.
That sounds a lot like what we're seeing now. Do you see parallels?
Oh, there's no question. Anytime a president is under attack, the president, or at least the president's partisans and supporters, will likely go on the attack. Hey, he's my guy, and you're attacking my guy.
And it's an effective strategy.
It can be, happily, I shouldn't say happily, but I think there was accountability. Whatever people think of the investigation during the Monica Lewinsky phase, the president had to eventually concede that he had not conducted himself as he should in a very serious manner when he was under oath. That's the key. It was all about the rule of law.
I want to ask you about Monica Lewinsky, who went public this past year saying she met you once in a restaurant.
First time.
For the first time.
Right.
And she said she kind of expected an apology for how things went for her, but you didn't offer one. Do you think one's needed?
No. With all due respect, Monica, and I wish her all the best. Her life has been disrupted, but the evidence is the evidence, and she was part, as we saw it, of an effort to obstruct justice and to commit perjury.
Ken Starr, thank you very much for coming on Face the Nation.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We will be right back. That's it for us today. Thanks for watching. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.